In 2011, DC Comics embarked on their biggest company-wide reset since the release of Crisis on Infinite Earths back in 1985, as the comic giant set about scrapping their long-established status quo and continuity and starting completely fresh. The DC Universe was to be rebooted. Much like Crisis did back in 1985, DC hoped that this new initiative would revitalise the company from a mainstream standpoint, giving non-comic readers a perfect time to begin reading DC's books, without the shackles of decades of continuity and convoluted storytelling. The end result of this was the New 52. Beginning with the conclusion of the company's crossover miniseries Flashpoint, the New 52 saw all the various titles set within the DC Universe be cancelled, and relaunched with new #1 issues, wiping the slate clean for an all-new and exciting rebooted DC Universe. But did it work? We're now close to a decade after the launch of the New 52, so it feels like an appropriate time to go back and analyse the successes and the failures of this initiative. So in this video, we're going to discuss the factors that led up to the New 52's creation, the ways in how it aimed to shake up the long-established status quo of DC Comics, the factors that led to its slow dissolvement over the past number of years, and the modern-day rebirth of DC Comics. So, before we dive into the reasons behind the creation of the New 52, I first want to give a quick overview of the history of the DC Comics universe, and its interesting relationship with reboots and continuity. The DC Universe as we know it today began in 1938 with the release of Action Comics issue 1 and the introduction of the company's flagship character, Superman. Now, the success of Superman's early stories saw a huge creative boom period for the industry, with DC rolling out fellow costume heroes including Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern and The Flash in subsequent years. This early period, often called the Golden Age of comics, saw the modern DC Universe begin to take shape. The company began to cross over their various superheroes, confirming that all of these characters did exist within one singular continuity, capped off with the debut of the Justice Society of America in All-Star Comics issue 3 from 1940. Now, this continued into the late 1950s and the birth of the Silver Age, with DC introducing two crucial characters in the form of Barry Allen, who took up the Flash mantle from Jay Garrick, and the new Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. The creation of Barry Allen is particularly important to understanding DC's history with continuity, as the company used his existence to reveal that he and Garrick, and by extension the Golden Age DC Universe, existed in separate realities from one another, thereby outlining the concept of the multiverse. Fast forward to 1985, and DC took this notion one step further, with Jorge Perez's classic series Crisis on Infinite Earths, wherein the story concluded with the destruction of the multiverse and a hard reset on the entire DC continuity, with the post-Crisis era becoming the commonly established status quo for the universe. And although later stories would make slight adjustments to continuity, the DC canon forged back in 1985 had remained largely firm and entrenched by the time that Flashpoint was released in mid-2011. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about how DC went about creating the New 52. And to do that, we first have to touch on the story that led up to it, Flashpoint. Flashpoint is a 5-issue limited series written by Jeff Johns and drawn by Andy Kubert that sees Barry Allen, aka The Flash, travel back in time to prevent the death of his mother when he was a child. He succeeds, but this change has huge ripple effects on the wider DC universe. Superman is now nowhere to be found, Thomas Wayne is a vengeful and murderous Batman, the Atlanteans and the Amazonians are locked into a bitter war, and Cyborg is the only true superhero. Now, at the end of the story, Barry, with the help of these dystopian heroes, travels through the Speed Force to repair the time stream, hoping to restore the universe to its usual state. However, while doing so, he sees 3 different timelines beginning to converge, representing the main DC continuity, the Vertigo universe from Earth 13, and the Wildstorm universe of Earth 50. Barry is then visited by a mysterious figure named Pandora, who tells him that the world as it was split into three in order to weaken them for an impending threat, and now the time has come for them to be reunited. Upon exiting the Speed Force, Barry discovers a whole new world around him, as the New 52 was born. Understanding Flashpoint is pivotal to understanding the creation of the New 52, but questions still remain as to whether the plan was always for this crossover Flash series to be the launching point for a company-wide reboot. At the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con, before Flashpoint was released but was already announced, both Geoff Johns and writer Dan DiDio spoke of their upcoming plans for both the Flash series and the Adventures of Superman title, both of which would take place after Flashpoint, but weren't going to be reboots. For example, Johns mentioned doing a Flash book called Flash Speed Force, focused on Wally West and Bart Allen. However, clearly the events of Flashpoint and its success the following year changed this thought process, as in May of 2011, the company announced that Flashpoint's conclusion would usher in a new age for DC Comics, and announcing that not only would all of their existing titles be reset to number 1, but that the first comic to take place in this new continuity, Justice League Issue 1, would be released the same day as Flashpoint's finale. Now, Justice League Issue 1 ushered us into the new world of the New 52, with this story taking place 5 years before the events of all of the other books, allowing us to get a sense of time and where our heroes are at currently. The issue introduces us to our core DC heroes, with the Justice League lineup consisting of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Barry Allen the Flash, Hal Jordan the Green Lantern, Aquaman and Cyborg, who all meet for the very first time and unite to prevent an invasion of Earth by the villainous Darkseid. And as far as introductions go, the initial Justice League story penned by Johns and artist Jim Lee is as solid as you could possibly want. It's a fantastic story and seemingly set the New 52 era of DC Comics up fairly well for the future. Alongside this, the likes of Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash and so on all received new and updated origins and backstories in their respective titles, with only Batman and Green Lantern's histories not being completely reset, an issue that we'll touch on later. But the initial months of the New 52 did seem to be positive, as many of the best work released in this period are from these first few months. For example, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo took over Batman, hitting an immediate home run with their Court of Owls storyline. Geoff Johns, in addition to writing Justice League, handled Green Lantern, Aquaman and Shazam, with Aquaman in particular being one of the biggest beneficiaries of the New 52, while Grant Morrison's initial run on Action Comics proved an interesting take on the ever-familiar Superman story. In truth, throughout 2011, it seemed as if the New 52 was going to be a huge success. So the next question is, what happened? While the initial months of the New 52 seemed to be extremely positive, once the honeymoon period wore off, the cracks in the series began to become apparent. One of the biggest issues that developed throughout the New 52's lifespan was the fact that, despite its intention stating otherwise, the universe's continuity was never as simple and straightforward as it was marketed as, and the longer it went on, the more it only seemed to confuse and frustrate its readership. A good example of this is Batman, a character whose history wasn't reset by the New 52, who now had his entire 70+ year history condensed into a 5-year window, meaning that everything from becoming the Dark Knight, to adopting Dick Grayson, to the Killing Joke, to Nightfall, a death in the family and so on, all took place within this brief period of time. DC tried to juggle their desire to make their heroes seem young and cool, and easier to start reading without the decades of existing continuity, with not wanting to let go of the classic stories that had proved so beloved and successful. Likewise, another common complaint towards the New 52 was that the heroes weren't just depicted as being younger, but a much more self-serious tone came along with it, as DC editorial seemed intent on making the New 52 a more darker and gritty rendition of the classic DC universe. Characters such as Superman, Wonder Woman and the Teen Titans, for example, were traditionally seen as figures of heroism, virtue and eternal optimism, but became much more cynical and angsty in this period. Superman especially suffered greatly from his New 52 reimagining, so much so that that version of the character was literally killed off and replaced by the post-crisis version, in a very Principal Skinner-esque manner. New 52 Superman, aside from the early Grant Morrison issues, just wasn't the same hero that fans grew up reading, a problem only exacerbated when the character's history was also wiped away entirely, leaving readers with no emotional ties to this character. In many ways, the thought process of the New 52 reminds me of Marvel Comics and their failed Heroes Reborn reboot from the 1990s. In both cases, the company sought to relaunch many of their flagship characters, reset their origins, and provide a clear jumping on point for new readers. But DC's approach, much like Heroes Reborn, towards the New 52 suffered from a clear lack of vision, a reliance on more edgy and darker storytelling, and at times, it didn't feel like the New 52 was about creating a new and modern take on the DC universe at all. It, at its worst, felt like a replay of the storytelling conventions prevalent throughout the 1990s, but without any of the extended lore, history, or fan support for those versions of those characters and stories that carried any creative missteps through the decade. However, maybe the biggest problem that plagued the New 52 actually occurred behind the scenes at DC Comics. You see, all throughout this period of DC's history, it seemed as if the writers, artists, and editors were constantly clashing with one another, resulting in a number of promising series being cut short, interesting ideas left untapped, and both creators and readers left frustrated. A key example of this early on involves Jorge Perez, the writer of the classic Crisis on Infinite Earths series, who was tasked with helming the Superman title upon the New 52's launch. Now, problems began almost immediately, as Grant Morrison was working on Action Comics, a series that was set 5 years prior to the main Superman title. This caused frustration, as Perez was constantly asking Morrison and DC about the nature of this 5-year time gap, and what parts of the Superman mythos should and shouldn't he include in his book. He recalls the situation behind the scenes at the time, stating that, "I had no idea Grant Morrison was going to be working on another Superman title. I had no idea I was doing it 5 years ahead, so I was kind of stuck. Oh my gosh, are the Kents alive? What's his relationship with all of these characters? Who exists?" And DC couldn't give me answers. I said, "Oh my gosh, you're deciding all these things and you mean you don't even know what's going on in your own books?" Ultimately, Perez's frustration grew to the point where he could no longer work under these circumstances, quitting the Superman series after just 6 issues. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Another high-profile example of this can be found in the New 52 Batwoman series, first written by J.H. Williams and W. Hayden Blackman. Blackman and Williams' early run on Batwoman was a huge success initially, with fans thoroughly enjoying the story that the pair were setting up in the issues, building up to Kate Kane, aka Batwoman, dating and eventually proposing to former Metropolis police captain Maggie Sawyer. The plan was for Kane and Sawyer to get married. However, DC editorial nixed the decision at the last minute, causing both Williams and Blackman to walk from the title altogether in December 2013, with the pair stating that the 11th hour nature of these changes left us frustrated and angry, because they prevent us from telling the best stories we can. So, after a lot of soul searching, we've decided to leave the book after issue 26. The problem is though, these aren't even the only instances of these problems occurring. In fact, I could name many more examples of editorial failure and clashes during this time, from Batgirl writer Gail Simone being fired by email only to be brought back later due to fan backlash, Andy Diggle quitting Action Comics 3 months before he was set to start working on the series, to Rob Liefeld being hired to work on Deathstroke, Grifter and the Savage Hawkman, but left the company after only a year, citing massive indecision, last minute, and I mean last minute, changes that alter everything, and what he described as an editorial pissing contest. Ultimately, when you combine this lack of editorial foresight and planning with unpopular characterizations of then beloved characters, and a disregard for the stories and qualities which made them so popular to begin with, you could make the argument that the New 52 was a sinking ship to begin with. And even though the series did create a number of seminal and highly popular moments within it, they merely served to cover the deep and ever-growing cracks in the company and the universe's foundations. Despite the glimmers of hope that shone through the many problems behind the scenes, the longer DC continued with the New 52, the more it became clear that this simply just couldn't last. As the years continued, the company saw their sales figures sharply decline. For example, September 2011, the first full month of the New 52, saw DC hold 8 of the top 10 best-selling comics of that month. However, by the end of 2011, Marvel had regained their position at the top spot in the industry, outperforming DC in both dollars and units sold by December of that year. Flash forward to April 2013, and DC's unit share of the market fell below 28%, and by January 2014, it only stood at around 31%. This economic slump continued into 2015, causing DC editorial to announce that following the Convergence miniseries, the company was going to subtly retire the New 52 branding, concurrently launching the DCU, an initiative which sought to de-emphasise continuity between respective titles and allow writers and artists to have more freedom over their stories, resulting in the likes of Scott Snyder's super heavy arc of Batman, where Jim Gordon took up the mantle of the Dark Knight, and Greg Pak's depowering of Superman in his Truth story arc. And while I don't think the intentions behind the DCU were bad per se, it did very little to salvage the universe in which DC had invested so much time and money into since 2011, and by the summer of 2016, the company formally announced the New 52 was ending, as Jeff Johns penned the one-shot series DC Rebirth in May of that year, with a namesake initiative launched soon after that undid many of the larger problems with the New 52 and restored the DC universe to a form more similar to the post-crisis universe, while keeping some of the more favourable elements and stories from the New 52. Throughout Rebirth and Johns' follow-up series Doomsday Clock, DC have attempted to redefine the New 52 era as a period in which hope and optimism were mysteriously stolen from the universe, and bizarre, incorrect characterizations of our heroes replaced their more familiar depictions, ultimately blaming Dr. Manhattan for these changes in storyline, while also acknowledging the faults of their endeavours outside of the printed page. But with all of that said, it's interesting to look back and evaluate the failures and the successes of the New 52 some years later, with enough time since both its creation and demise to judge its legacy and its impact. While overall I would argue that the New 52 was somewhat of a failed endeavour, I do think it's important to highlight the notable amount of good things which came out of it. Because of the New 52, we got a ton of beloved series and runs, from Scott Snyder's Batman to Jeff Johns' Aquaman, Grant Morrison's Multiversity, Brian Azzarello's Wonder Woman, Gail Simone's Batgirl, and Williams and Blackman's run on Batwoman, to name a few. But more importantly, the New 52 did accomplish one of its key goals. It did provide a clear and easy jumping on point for new readers to get into DC Comics. For all of its flaws, the New 52 did allow new and old fans a chance to explore new characters and series with new ideas without being intimidated and confused by long-standing continuity. Hell, the New 52 allowed me to read and discover a lot of new characters, such as Aquaman and Shazam and Batwoman, and I think that although this attitude can be linked to a number of problems that both fans and writers had with the initiative later on, it is hard to overlook the positives that spawned out of the New 52. Ultimately though, the legacy of the New 52 could be argued to be that of a cautionary tale, a somewhat rushed attempt to reboot the DC universe with a number of bright and exciting ideas at the forefront, but a lack of editorial planning and foresight, mixed with the problems that arose when throwing out decades of history that readers had become emotionally attached to, meant the series eventually lacked any real style, feel or identity, and in the end, it had to be put down in order for a successful rebirth to happen. The New 52 wasn't all bad though. It won't go down as the same kind of failure as A Heroes Reborn, or Frank Miller's All-Star Batman, or the Spider-Man clone saga, but rather a time of wasted potential, editorial mismanagement, and a lack of understanding as to what made the world fall in love with DC Comics to begin with. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on the New 52. Were you a fan of it? What were some of your favourite books? And how did it affect you getting into comics? Did you get into comics because of the New 52? If you did, let me know down below. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. As always, if you enjoyed the video and you're new around here, please consider hitting the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all the new videos we make on the channel. There are also some other videos on screen right now that you may enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And if you enjoyed the video and you want to show your appreciation and support, you can make a one-time donation at Ko-fi, or you could pledge on Patreon. Links to both will be down in the description. You can follow me on Twitter just at Owen Likes Comics. And that's all for me. I will see you all next time. So until then, take care and keep reading.